All right, so this is going to be the most Fisher core thing that I've ever done. I'm going to talk about bait for a while. um, it's come up a lot actually recently, especially with the new expansion and new baits are being added. A lot of people are like, why do we have so many baits? Do I need them all? What about a bait box? Like, what does it even do? And so I thought I'd talk about that a bit broadly. So just to get the questions that I know everyone's thinking about right now out of the way, do you need to have all the baits in your inventory? No. Unless you are planning to go big fishing, you don't need all the bait. And even if you are big fishing, you probably don't need all the bait you have. You really only need a few if you plan to casually fish, like if you're doing custom deliveries or ocean fishing. Those are all things that you can just do with a small handful of specific baits, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. The other question is, are we going to get a bait box to store all the baits? And something Square Enix has already addressed. I think this was maybe back in Shadowbringers. It might have been before that. I don't remember specifically when it was said, but it was many years ago, that much I can say. But they have said that they would rather give everybody more general storage than just give like niche, unique storage to a few for a very unique thing that really only a few people are going to use. So they would rather give everybody more storage than just like that niche bit of storage for baits. So hopefully those are the two most common questions out of the way. Let's talk about how bait actually works. So bait comes in like two varieties. You have your live bait and you have your lures. And when I talk about lures in this video, I'm going to be talking about the tackle, like lures, the type of bait and tackle you use, not the level 100 skills. So with live bait, whenever a fish bites or you catch a fish, that bait is consumed. So if you're using, say, herring ball and you get a bite on your line, one herring ball will be consumed whether or not you successfully reel in the fish. However, if you are using a lure, say metal spinner, if you catch a fish, there is a chance that the lure remains. It does not go down by one. You will still have 5 if you just have 5 in your inventory. That is a form, lures are basically a form of reusable bait. And this is kind of talked about in the fishing MSQ, but it isn't super clear. So if you missed it, it's understandable. But basically, you don't need to buy 99 like short bill minnow, because that is a lure that is reusable. And you can usually tell based on the description whether or not it's a live bait or a lure, but it doesn't tell you that it's reusable in the description itself. So with live bait, you are typically going to be seeing shorter bite times than with lures. This isn't always the case. There are cases where it's roughly the same. It has been kind of inconsistent, but something that the game points out, so I am going to point out, is lures, the reusable bait, quote unquote reusable, typically have or lead to longer bite times on fish than live bait if the same fish can be caught with live bait. Not always the case, but it is something that is pointed out, and you do see that sometimes. So something else that's a bit of a difference there, and that's just a whole other layer of things that we don't need to get into, and it's usually very minimally impactful, especially if you're big fishing. The other thing to point out with lures is when they do break, like when you do lose one, the rate at which you can lose a lure isn't consistent, and it isn't fully understood how exactly losing a lure works. But what we have kind of observed is it is either per lure or per fish that will determine the rate at which you are losing a lure. So a fish like I think it's Dark Knight or no, Fairy Queen in Lenosha is known for eating a lot of lures. Moratecta is known for eating a lot of shortbill minnow in the Calvin Gap. Whereas if you're using, say you're going for like Inktopuss in Dawntrail with a metal spinner, you're less likely to lose a metal spinner off of that fish. So sometimes you might notice that you're losing more lures than like other lures, depending on the fish you're going for. That's not wholly understood, but it is something that is at least acknowledged by the community, that there is a difference in rate. It is not universally like a 5% chance on every lure. Now, baits and live baits and lures, which I'm just going to call bait at this point. I might call it tackle, but bait actually has a level. So if you are, say, level 10, you cannot equip Dawntrail bait, like, because that's all level 90 plus. You can't use that. If you're level 10, you can't equip like squid strip because that's level 80. You can't equip giant crane fly because that's level 60. So that is one method that they have for differentiating bait between expansions, and also adding a sort of a sense of progression is probably the way to put it, throughout leveling a fisher and traveling through these different zones. So this isn't wholly impactful, especially now with ocean fishing where you just shoot through the ranks. You probably didn't even notice that. But if you are ocean fishing and say you're on the Ruby route, but you're only level 50 and you're trying to go for Taniwa, you can't catch Taniwa because you need mackerel strip, which is a level 90 bait, and you're only level 50 at the time. You can't actually use that. So you do have a little bit of that gating, but for the most part, outside of ocean fishing, you probably won't notice that. And finally, every fish has a set amount of bait, and I don't want to say set amount of bait. It has a list of bait that it will bite on. So, for example, Sky Fairy. Sky Fairy will bite on giant crane fly. It'll bite on metal spinner. I think it bites on like red balloon. But we'll use giant crane fly and metal spinner specifically for this example. Any fishing hole where Sky Fairy appears, if you use giant crane fly, Sky Fairy has a chance to bite. If you use metal spinner, Sky Fairy has a chance to bite. We actually use this to our advantage on sea butterfly, where metal spinner, which is used to catch all of the custom delivery fish, amongst others, we're able to use that on Makogul Island, where metal spinner only bites on will only cause 2 fish to bite: Sky Fairy and scorpion flies. And both of those are needed for the intuition for sea butterflies, so you can do some really weird stuff with that. But kind of moving along a little bit too quickly down the road of like why bait choice is important and stuff like that. But what you need to know is if you caught a fish on a certain bait, that fish will be caught on that bait in every other instance where that fish appears. And that is like a universal constant. There's even sometimes where like a Realm Reborn bait is used in Heavensward or vice versa. I forget exactly. Or like a Realm Reborn fish will appear in Heavensward and the bait still works. So something to keep in mind when it comes down to like bait strategy, but we'll talk about that again in a little bit. So at the start, I was also talking about, there's a ton of bait. Like there's a lot of bait. I did a quick count, and this is a bit rough. There is over 100 different types of bait just for ocean fishing and expansion fishing. I'm not counting diadem. I'm not counting necessarily the relic, but out of the, what do we have, 6 games for Final Fantasy XIV, A Realm Reborn Plus, there's A Realm Reborn, which has about 49 bait to my rough estimate. I may be off on that a little bit, but just something to point out. It has a lot. That's the main point. 10 in Heaven's Word, technically 9 because Metal Spinner counts. It is within the Heaven's Word level bracket, but Metal Spinner was added actually in Shadowbringers. There's 9 in Stormblood. There's 9 in Shadowbringers, plus 4 more for the Diadem, plus 1 more for the Relic. There's 11 in Endwalker, plus another 1 for the Relic, and then there's 11 in Dawntrail, and I'm not even counting all the baits that are in Cosmic Exploration because you don't need them because they are very transient. They just kind of come into your inventory and then leave, and you don't need them. But that's a lot of bait. And again, going back, do you need them all? No. But why is there so many? And that's because Final Fantasy XIV's fishing follows this idea of trying to be a little realistic, at least being grounded in reality, even though it's very fanciful. It is still kind of grounded a bit in the idea that saltwater bait is not necessarily the same or going to work on freshwater bait, on freshwater, like fishing holes. If I'm out fishing in the real world, as I will do, there are different types of bait that I will pick if I am fishing over on the shore into the ocean versus if I'm fishing into a lake. Final Fantasy XIV follows this. So for each of the different types of fishing holes that are in the game, each one has 1 or at least 2 baits. So say Aether Chemical spills have fiend worms, but fiend worms can only be used on Aether Chemical spills. Saltwater has a bunch, and it's all also very expansion based. So all the saltwater fishing holes in A Realm Reborn have their own suite of saltwater fish, saltwater fishing bait. Whereas the saltwater in Endwalker has its own bait. And so the reason why A Realm Reborn has so many is because it does have a very wide variety of fishing fishing water types. It has freshwater, it has saltwater, it has cloud, it has dune. It has so many of these different types and so many different types of fish, and they really wanted to give everybody variety on catching different types of fish. And so that's why there's so many. Do we need them all? No. They probably could trim a bunch of bait out of A Realm Reborn and no one would notice. I'm looking at you, Rolling Stone, and Geckos. But having that having that sort of diversity of fishing holes and having each bait be localized to its own expansion. So Endwalker, it might have saltwater baits, but it's only going to have like Endwalker types of saltwater baits. Realistically, makes sense going from that like grounded in reality. If I'm doing saltwater fishing in, say, northern Canada, I'm going to be using different bait than if I'm doing saltwater fishing off the coast of Brazil. Like, completely different habitats require different types of baits. So that's realistically kind of why they probably have, maybe not realistically, but narratively, why there's different baits, even though it's still all saltwater, because the game follows this rule of It is grounded. It is a fantasy game. It's grounded in reality, and it is going to emulate reality as much as it can with the whimsy flair. But it's also a game at the same time. I can hear you saying that right now. That's a very valid point, but it is, one thing that Final Fantasy has shown is that does love its narrative, does love the lore, and so they do typically stick towards erring on that side of things when it comes to making those decisions, at least for fishing. That's kind of how it's been. Finally, with bait, there are usually two different types. There are script bait and then there's vendor bait. So in Dawntrail, we have a variety of saltwater baits. We have like shucked clams, we have ghost nippers, and then we have crimson lugworms. Crimson lugworm can be bought at a vendor for gill. Easy. Everyone has some gill. They can go out and buy the bait, whatever they need. Shucked clams and ghost nippers, on the other hand, are script bait. You have to use Rowena's Gathering scripts or equivalent to purchase those baits. You can now also use Cosmo credit, based in Cosmic Exploration, which I think is a really good idea because it makes that bait way more accessible. But just something to add is that it's not, you need an alternative currency to be able to buy it, which puts it into a higher tier of, say, progression. Like with the gill bait, that's kind of the cheap bait. It's assumed that the script bait or script bait level is like the premium bait, and so that's why there's a little bit of a differentiation. What we haven't seen is script bait exclusive fishing holes, at least not commonly, if at all. So every type of fishing hole type, like sky fishing or aether chemical pools or saltwater, every expansion they have the vendor version and then they have a script version or multiple of that. We've never seen them lock a fishing hole type to just script, at least not that I can think of off the top of my head as I'm saying this. Maybe, actually I lied. Heaven's Ward, yeah. Until the Splendorous tools were added, Heaven's Ward, Fiendworm, so the aether chemical pools, I believe were those were actually script locked. So I thought of that off the top of my head as I was going through it. But yeah, so that is something that is there. You don't see it very often. It's not like all of Thavnair's coast was locked to script bait. You could use shrimp ball if you wanted, not just mackerel strip. But and going back to what I was saying, that basically puts script bait at that like quote unquote premium tier, and so you do have some fish that get locked behind quote unquote that script tier of bait, where it's best to go for those fish on that premium bait because that's when they bite the most, and so there's usually a trade-off. Collectibles, we saw this with Dawntrail, I think Ghost Nipper and Copper Shark, that was like the go-to way of getting Copper Shark was to use Ghost Nipper, and so you would have to invest orange script to get even more orange script back. So that's kind of like a weird cycle that they play. But going back to that differentiation, there's those two types of sources. Back in A Realm Reborn, we were also able to craft bait. So Goldsmith and Culinarian would be able to make baits that you could then use. So spinnerbait, Yumizuno, I believe was the other one. Amongst other like various spoon lures and one type of like boilie would be crafted basically, and they would be good bait to use for certain fishing holes. That we haven't seen since then, which I think is kind of a shame. I think it's really fun and interesting to be able to craft your own bait. One of the things that fishers, like myself at least, have been thinking about and kind of wanting is new ways of unlocking baits. So either via crafting, via other gathering, like using botanists to gather worms that you use as bait, using a miner to catch or to gather rocks that you would then smelt into or turn into baits. A ton of different ways that we were going with that, but that's kind of like a thing that we would be really interested in seeing because that's just a fun way to engage with fishing. That's down the road, that's another whole other conversation, but really we don't see crafted baits anymore. It is just vendor and it is just script. And you're probably wondering, why do we have two different types of baits? Why do we need a vendor bait and a script bait? Why does every fishing hole have multiple types? If we look beyond the fact that some people might not have access to scripts or don't have any scripts at the time and they just need something in a pinch, maybe they don't care about getting scripts and they just want to buy some bait. Ignoring that, like I mentioned before, every fish that can bite on a certain bait will always bite on that bait regardless of the fishing hole that it's in. However, what I didn't mention was the bite rate per bait changes. So when you are looking at fish like snowy paraxis, you may look at the Carby tracker and it says, oh, use leech for ceruleum cores. That's listed because it's just a cheaper option and it's a common tier fish. But mayflies actually have a higher bite rate for ceruleum core. They will actually, it's kind of noticeable too, you will get more ceruleum cores on mayfly than on leeches. So it's actually recommended to just, if you're going for snowy paraxis, just use mayfly the entire time because that's what snowy paraxis bites on. The other thing is different baits when it comes to big fishing. Big fish will only bite on one specific bait, and I'm going to there's an asterisk on that, which I'll talk to in a minute, or talk to about in a minute. But big fish will only bite on one specific bait. So you can only catch Garliicthus with mackerel strip. You can only catch Anthenia dahlia with sky spoonler, or furcicata with sky spoonler. You can only catch mercy staff, I think, is a straight catch with brute leech. You can only catch magic bucket with brute leech. Again, with an asterisk on those, but having that variety there, and then having that tier of script bait versus vendor bait adds that little level of progression and prestige on you have to use the higher tier baits to catch the big fish. But the different bite rates is actually very important. So if we look at Limne 3 beta, which is a fishing hole where sidereal whale, philania, EBE, big numbers, and a variety of other fish and ultimate thule can be caught, you can use panic jig, or you can use stardust, which is technically a live bait, but both of those would work. The bite rates of all the fish that bite on those different baits are different. So on panic jig, EBEs actually bite a little bit more than on stardust. Horizon events bite less on panic jigs than on stardust. This is why we recommend stardust for sidereal whale, because it has the higher bite rate for the target fish. So when we're looking at new big fish that are coming in, if it's a fish that requires, if it's a straight catch fish and it's it only is caught on Red Maggot, then we optimize around red maggot. But if it's a mooch, say going for rime pike caught in the Eblin Thon Garlemald, then we don't look at, the big fish itself. We look at what's the bait that's best suited to catch the mooch that we have to catch. In that case, it's cerulean cores, and in that particular case, technically, it is mayfly. Mayfly has the highest bite rate of cerulean core. And this is something that has started to cause some issues. Like I mentioned at the start of this, or at least I should have mentioned at the start of this, there was a brief moment when I've actually stepped away in the middle of this, and you may not know when it is. But during the middle of this, or at the beginning of this, I should have mentioned that some of the hardcore fishers, kind of like myself, are annoyed with red maggot. And if you've been around through Endwalker, you probably also know that we are really annoyed with mayflies. This is stemming from the choice of bait that is being used for big fish, specifically straight catch fish. So in Endwalker, there was a lot of straight catch fish, and they were all freshwater. There was a wide variety of freshwater lures that we could use. We could use sky spoon lure, you could have golden salmon roe, you could have had mayflies, and most of the fish were caught on mayfly, which kind of leads to a bit of a boring experience for fishers like myself. This is very much like a fisher world problem. I'm very much aware of that. But I want to explain why. Because each bait has a different bite rate of all the fish, effectively using different baits creates a different experience when going for certain fish. So when all of the fish are using the same bait, yes, it's great for inventory management because I don't need to have golden salmon roe, I just need to have a bunch of mayflies. But it also makes the experience very similar because mayfly is that script bait. It is a very commonly used bait for like collectibles. We have a lot of data on it. It doesn't really create like an engaging atmosphere in solving the quote unquote puzzle that is the big fish. Like, what is the optimization we want to take? Because we've already tested all the script baits. Those are usually some of the first ones that get tested, so we have the data. We don't have to go back. It's kind of boring because it's the same bait over and over again, and so it's roughly the same experience, or at least a very similar experience. You catch this, slap that, move on. Slaps are sometimes usually the same between fishing holes if it's the same bait. So it just became very dull and repetitive. And we're starting to see that again with Red Maggot in Dawntrail, where I'm pretty certain it's every straight catch freshwater fish uses Red Maggot. We have like honeybee, we have golden stonefly nymph, we have popper lure, we have 3 other baits that we could be using for these big fish to add a little bit of variety to it, and we're not actually seeing that, which makes it just makes it repetitive. It's kind of dull. Like, it really is a fisher world problem, and if you're listening to this, you probably don't care as much, but it's just something that it's like a little thing that, like, if we just tweak it, it would be a whole lot more fun. And going back to the realism part of that as well, like when I was mentioning earlier, it's like Final Fantasy is grounded in reality. Some of these fish that we've caught, like Giga Giant Snakehead in the final zone of Dawntrail, whose name is immediately escaping me now, lost memory. It in the real world, if I'm going to go fish for a snakehead, I'm not using maggots. I'm going to be using something like a popper lure. I'm going to be using something that will trigger the snakehead's predatory instinct to want to chase after whatever is making a noise, which the popper lure will exactly do that. So having Giga Giant Snakehead caught on Red Maggot is kind of frustrating in terms of that sense. Again, that is such a me problem. It's like I'm pretty certain it's just like me and maybe 5 other people care enough about that to make a to talk about it. But it is something that I want to point out of this is why you're seeing this. It's just because it's boring. It's not it doesn't add diversity. It's not true to what fishing is, which is again kind of that realistic. It's almost a sim, but not really. It's like a fantasy sim. It's just like a weird expectation that was set with years of fishing, like Stormblood, Shadowbringers, and before. And then suddenly in the past 2 expansions, we're just getting like the same baits over and over again. From a design standpoint, it makes sense because having just one bait makes it easier for the inventory management, and I fully acknowledge that. I agree with that type of thought as well. But when you look at it from you need to solve the problem, like you need to solve the fishing puzzle, like to optimize and figure out which bait is which, and also while trying to stay true to what fish you are catching and that reality, that grounded portion of reality. Having everything caught on Red Maggot, if it's freshwater, is just bleh. I could probably also rant a bit about how paddlefish, of which we have 2 now, in at least 2 freshwater paddlefish. We got 2 in Endwalker, but they were in aether chemical pools. In Dawntrail, we got the Turali paddlefish and Takatoa in Shaolani and Lake Teori. Both of those are caught off of mooch, which kind of makes sense. But in reality, if you're actually going to be fishing for paddlefish in real life, you're not going to be using bait at all. You use a term, and I'm not joking, called snagging, to where you basically just have a line of, basically it's a line of hooks. Like they're maybe like 6-8 inches apart on your fishing line. You very carefully throw it out to where you think that the paddlefish are, and then you start slowly reeling it in, and you try and snag onto the paddlefish that way. That is because paddlefish are filter feeders. They just swim around with their mouths open and they take whatever comes in. So they're not going to be targeting specific bait like, say, a snakehead or a bass would. They don't care. They're just going to be swimming around. So the fact that you don't need snagging to catch the paddlefish is kind of sad. But again, that's like a me nitpick that we probably don't need to go too far into. But it is just, it's those little things. Anyways, I veered off the topic of bait. Let me talk about ways that you can actually save inventory space if you are fishing. So first thing is use a versatile lure, or at least look into using a versatile lure. If you are planning on just casually fishing, maybe you're just catching, stuff to craft like golden tail eel or Thavnarian squid, but you don't want to deal with baits, consider the versatile lure. The versatile lure was added and was basically introduced as a literal catch-all for fish. The one exception is that it doesn't catch fabled legends, which is the blue background fish in the ocean fishing spectral currents, so like coral manta, taniwa, glass dragon. No, technically glass dragon because it's caught off a mooch, but that's a different thing. But like, yeah. And any fabled legend fish and any straight catch legendary fish cannot be caught with versatile lure. I specify straight catch because with mooched legendaries like Ruby Dragon or like Glass Dragon in ocean fishing, like I mentioned, they're caught off mooches, and then because the fish that you mooch to catch them are not legendary fish and are valid catches for versatile lure, then you can use versatile lure technically to catch those legendaries. So technically you can use versatile lure to catch the ruby dragon. I wouldn't recommend it. And that is because all big fish that can be caught on versatile lure have abysmal rates. Like, they are not great rates. I do not recommend using the versatile lure to go big fishing because you will spend much more time going for the big fish than if you actually went out, gathered the script you needed, or earned the gill you needed, and then just bought the bait that it requires. Like, you will just spend more time doing it. Not worth it. But if you're just going for collectibles, or you're going for like craftables, versatile lure, go for it. Like, sometimes it's not ideal, but if you don't want to deal with the inventory of multiple baits, just use a versatile lure. It's fine. They're also super durable. I bought 50 versatile lure at some point, and I think I've lost 2 in 4 years. So definitely would recommend using those if you are not planning to go big fishing. I wouldn't use them ocean fishing either. I would definitely have ragworm, krill, and plumpworm on you for that if you plan to go ocean fishing. And I'll talk about which baits to have for casual fishers here at the end. But just something to keep in mind, that I wouldn't use it for ocean fishing because versatile lure definitely makes bites longer. And in ocean fishing, the longer it takes to bite on average, the less points you're going to get, and it's a mess. So I wouldn't use versatile lure ocean fishing, but for everything else, except big fishing, versatile lure is great. So if you are going through your inventory and you're like, man, do I need this bait? There's a few ways to note if you need or even want to keep the bait without needing to actually like look at the fish or look at the fish that are caught on the bait. If your bait can be if your bait can be bought from a vendor for gill, I would sell it. With the exception of some lures which cost, like 1,000 gill, just get rid of them and then just buy it if you need it. You can also just sell it back to the vendor, get some of your money back. You can sell it on the market board for probably you probably upsell it. But something just to keep in mind is that you can always get those vendor baits, like those gill vendor baits, whenever you need them. You just have to go to the vendor and buy them. And I would recommend going to, for everything in A Realm Reborn to Stormblood, go to Kagane, and then usually the vendors in the zones where you're going to be catching fish will have the bait that you need to catch. So you can just buy it on your way over. Also, look at the level of the bait. Like I mentioned earlier, that baits all have different levels, so that like there's a sense of progression there. If you are not planning to go fishing for anything in Heaven's Ward, any bait that's between like level 50, 51-ish and level 60, you can probably get rid of, because you're not going to need any of that Heaven's Ward bait. That's all just bait that you'll be using in Heaven's Ward. The one exception to that is Metal Spinner. I would keep Metal Spinners, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So look at, just think like, which fish do I want to be catching? If you just want to be catching Thavnarian squid in Thavnar, then keep whatever you would need for that, like shrimp balls. That's going to be between level 80 and 90. Just keep those. That's it. You're done. Cool. You only need one spot for those. But those are also vendor baits, so you can just chuck them too at the same time. Now, if you plan to casually fish, there's a few baits that I would always just keep in mind, like keep on you. And that is a versatile lure, ragworm, plumpworm, and krill for ocean fishing, and then metal spinner. And I would only keep metal spinner on if you plan to do the fishing custom deliveries, like if you're using it to level or just get script. If you're not, you can basically get rid of metal spinner. But those 5 baits I would always recommend having on you. And 5 baits is way easier to manage than the 100 plus that are in the game right now. You really do not need to have all of those baits if you are just casually fishing. Now, if you're big fishing, that's going to be a little bit different. At that point, it's going to depend on how you approach, going for all the big fish. If you are just going to catch fish as they are up, you're going to need to you're going to need to have a lot of bait on you. But if you are short on inventory and you want to go big fishing, I would recommend actually go by expansion. And if you are really, really short on bait, for a Realm Reborn specifically, I might just go by region. So like all of Lenosha, all of Korthus, all of Thanalan, or some mixture of the two. And then just get baits that you need for that. Tools like Teamcraft will tell you what bait you want to use for those big fish. If you are using the Carby tracker, if you press the bait icon in the upper right-hand corner, it will tell you every bait that you need of fish that are currently visible on and uncaught on your tracker, and which fish are using that bait. So you can just kind of determine like, oh, I should just go for all the fish that are caught on Brute Leech and just start there. That's another way of doing it. But as with all of fishing, really break down that big fishing goal and only focus on the baits you need, focus on like a specific expansion, those types of things. So that's kind of a really long ramble on baits for fishing. I never thought that this would be something that I would be spending going on, what is this, almost 42 and a half minutes talking about just bait in Final Fantasy, but there is a lot to talk about. The thing, though, that I want everyone to take away from this, though, is the baits are important, but they aren't so important that you have to hold on to them all the time. If you're a fisherman like me, my saddlebag is all full of bait, but that's because I will just spur of the moment go fishing. And I don't want to have to spend time picking up a vendor, grabbing bait, and then just going fishing. I might miss a window, or I might, it might take forever to go find where the vendor is because I have memorized where they all are, but they're usually around Aetherites, and there's a couple of weird picky ones. But if you're not like me, don't hold on to the bait. You don't need it. You really don't if you're just a casual fisher. Just keep the versatile lure, and if you plan to go ocean fishing, have ragworm, krill, and plump. That's all you need for points. If you plan to go for fabled legends, then you'll need some specific baits, and you can look those up. Or you can just ask your friends, and they'll be able to tell you. They might be able to tell you or help you find which baits you need. But, yeah, bait is really important. It helps with It helps with your optimization. It helps with the approach that you take on certain fish, and the timing of fish bites. That was something I didn't mention. I mentioned that lures take longer, but I didn't mention that live, like shrimp ball and mackerel strip, even though those are both live baits, the bite times are going to be different for each fish, just slightly. Not huge, but slightly it is. So like that variety of bait there is, now I'm actually rambling, but no, basically the bait you choose determines the strategy that you go for. when going after specific fish. And so that's why people like myself and a few other hardcore fishers are like, we're kind of annoyed with the same bait being used for big fish because we want to have some variety in the approaches that we take when going for big fish. Anyways, now I'm completely off track and rambled, but going back to what I was trying to end on. If you are just a casual fisher, versatile lure, ragworm, krill, plump, metal spinner, those 5. That's like the bread and butter casual fisher baits. After that, just it depends on what you want to do. If you and what you need and that what you have to keep, but you don't need to have all of those baits. You really don't need a tackle box. You like seriously, like the tackle box isn't something that you really need, something that fishing I don't think needs right now. It may in a few years, but it doesn't I don't think it needs it right now. But really just look at the bait, see where it's used. Am I going to fish this? No, get rid of it. That's it. That's going to be the main takeaway of this video is I hope you reduce your bait collection down from 50 to 5. But anyways, thank you everyone for listening, and good luck and happy fishing.